Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. The whole thing started because I typed my own name into a search bar, not out of vanity. I was setting up a new email account for work, something more professional than the one I'd had since I was 19, and I was trying variations of my name to see what was available. My name is Joel Marsh, which is common enough that most combinations were already taken. I tried a few versions, added numbers, moved things around, standard stuff. One of the combinations came back as available. I registered it, set a password, and was halfway through filling out the profile when I noticed the inbox wasn't empty. I figured it was a glitch, residual data from a previous account, some technical overlap. I almost closed it and moved on. Then I read the first email. It was addressed to my mother. Her full name, her actual email address, which I had not entered anywhere in the setup process. The email was casual and specific in the way emails to family are casual and specific. It referenced a conversation they'd apparently had recently, asked about her knee, mentioned that work had been busy but manageable. It was signed with my name. It had been sent 4 years ago. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. The voice was mine. Not similar to mine. Mine. The exact cadence and word choice I use when I'm writing to her without thinking too hard about it. I scrolled down. There were more. Dozens of them, going back 6 years, sent to people I knew. My mother, my co-worker Denny, a few friends, a woman I dated briefly in my late 20s. All of them written in my voice. All of them referencing my life with an accuracy that made my neck tighten. The job, the apartment, the specific complaints I had about specific things. 6 years of correspondence that I had never written. Sent from an account I had not created until 40 minutes ago. I checked the account creation date. 6 years and 3 months prior. I'd been living in a different city 6 years ago. I hadn't known this email address existed. I'm a residential plumber. I've been doing it for 11 years, and the job has made me practical in the way that hands-on work tends to make people practical. I believe in what I can see and touch and test. When something doesn't work, I find the reason, and the reason is always physical. A failed seal, a corroded pipe, a pressure issue that traces back to a specific point of origin. I applied that same approach to the emails. I spent the first evening just reading. I went chronologically, oldest first, and I took my time. The early emails were unremarkable, the kind of low-stakes correspondence anyone might have. Catching up with people, making plans, the ordinary traffic of a life. The voice was consistent throughout. It was mine. The differences started small. References to a house I didn't own. A 2-bedroom on a street in a neighborhood I'd looked at apartments in years ago, but never moved to. A mention of a job that was close to mine, but not mine. Same trade, different company. A commercial outfit rather than the residential work I did. I had no daughter. The other Joel had one. Her name was Mara. She came up the way kids come up in correspondence with family, mentioned in passing. A funny thing, she'd said. A school thing coming up. The texture of daily life with a small person in it. I don't have children. I've never had children. I sat with the fact of Mara for a long time. The emails got darker about 2 years in. It was gradual at first, a tone shift, a vague undercurrent of unease that didn't attach itself to anything specific. He mentioned in an email to my mother that he'd been feeling off. Not sick, he clarified, just off. Like something in the day-to-day had a quality he couldn't name, a wrongness that he couldn't locate clearly enough to address. He mentioned it again a few months later, more specifically. He said that people in his life seemed slightly different, not dramatically, not in ways he could point to in a single conversation, but accumulated over time. There was a change in the people closest to him, a subtle shift in how they spoke to him, what they remembered, what they seemed to think he was. He said it felt like he was being slowly written over, and that the writing was coming from somewhere very close. I read that sentence 4 times. 6 months before the email stopped, he wrote to Denny, my Denny. Same name, same email address, a guy I'd worked alongside for 8 years, and said he thought he'd figured out what it was. He didn't name it directly. He said it had been in his life for about a year at that point, wearing the face of someone he trusted, and that he'd been trying to find a way to confirm what he suspected without alerting it that he knew. The last email in the account was to no one. No recipient address. A draft, unsent. Just a paragraph sitting in the drafts folder. It said, "If you find this, it's already close to you. It doesn't come in loudly. It comes in as someone you already know, someone you'd have no reason to look at carefully. Look carefully. It will have been there longer than you think." That was it. Nothing after that. I did what he said not to do, which was to sit with it quietly for too long. I told myself I was being methodical. I went back through the emails, looking for anything that identified what he'd been afraid of, any name or description that would give me something to work with. There wasn't much. He'd been deliberately vague in the later emails, like a man who suspected his correspondence wasn't entirely private and was writing around the thing he meant rather than directly at it. What I had was the timeline. It had been in his life for about a year before the email stopped. It wore a face he trusted. It had been slowly changing the people around him, adjusting their memories and perceptions, making room for itself. I started thinking about my own life, about who had been in it for the past year or so, who had arrived quietly enough that I hadn't examined the arrival, who occupied a position of enough proximity and trust that I would have had no instinct to look closely. I made a short list. Then I made it shorter. His name was Callum, and he had been subletting the apartment next to mine for about 14 months. I want to be precise about why Callum ended up on the list, because it wasn't anything dramatic. It was an accumulation of small things that hadn't bothered me individually and that I only saw as a pattern once I was looking for one. He knew things about me that I couldn't specifically remember telling him. Not alarming things, just the quiet background detail of a life, the kind of information that gets exchanged naturally between neighbors over time. Except sometimes the detail was too precise, too current, like he had access to information that was more recent than our last actual conversation. He was friendly without being warm. That sounds like a small distinction, but it isn't. Warmth has texture to it, history, the particular ease of someone who has actually accumulated time with you. Callum's friendliness was smooth all the way through, like a surface without grain. I thought about the draft email. It doesn't come in loudly. It comes in as someone you already know, someone you'd have no reason to look at carefully. Callum wasn't someone I already knew. He was someone I'd gotten used to. I thought about whether that was the same thing. I knocked on his door on a Thursday evening. He answered the way he always answered, quickly, easily. No indication that a knock at his door was anything but expected. He invited me in. His apartment was neat and sparsely furnished, the way apartments look when someone hasn't fully committed to a space. I sat down. He sat across from me. I told him I had something I needed to ask him about, and that I needed him to be straight with me. He looked at me with an expression of complete, patient attention. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. Wrong in the way a clock is wrong when it shows the right time twice a day, but runs on no mechanism you can account for. The attention was too complete, too still. I told him about the emails. All of it, start to finish. The account and the timeline and the draft in the folder. I watched his face while I talked. Most people, hearing something like that, would react in stages. Skepticism first, then curiosity, then the specific kind of unease that comes from a story that doesn't have a clean explanation. Callum's face didn't move through stages. It stayed in the same configuration of patient attention all the way through, like a man listening to something he already knew. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" Not "what are you talking about?" Not "that's a strange story." How long have you known? I told him since Thursday. He nodded slowly. He looked around his apartment the way a person looks around a space they are preparing to leave. Not nostalgic, just assessing, checking. I asked him what he was. He looked at me when I said that, and something behind his face shifted in a way I don't have good language for. Not his features stayed the same. But whatever was behind them moved, the way something moves in deep water when it decides to surface. And for just a moment, I was looking at something that had been wearing Callum the way I wore a work jacket, practically and without particular attachment. Then it settled back. The Callum face reassembled itself. He said he didn't think the answer to that question would mean anything to me, and that the more useful information was that he'd be gone by morning. I asked him about the other Joel, about what had happened to him. He looked at the table between us. He said it was finished, the way you say something is finished when you're describing a process that has a definite endpoint. He said it without cruelty and without apology, the same way a river doesn't apologize for the direction it runs. I asked him about Mara. He didn't answer that one. He just looked at me steadily until I understood that he wasn't going to. I stood up. My legs felt distant, like the signal from my brain was taking longer than usual to arrive. I walked to his door and opened it and stood in the doorway. I told him that if he wasn't gone by morning, I'd find a way to make things complicated for him. I didn't know exactly what I meant by that. I don't think he did either. But he nodded like it was a reasonable position. And I went back to my apartment and locked the door and sat on my kitchen floor for a while. He was gone by morning. The apartment next door was empty. And I mean empty in a way that went past the removal of furniture. empty like a room that had been vacant for months, the particular stillness of a space that hasn't held a life in it for some time. I stood in his doorway and looked at bare walls and bare floors and a smell of dust that didn't belong to 14 months of occupancy. I asked the building manager about it. He told me that unit had been empty for almost a year, that there had been a tenant briefly, but they'd broken the lease and left, and he'd been having trouble filling it since. He said this with complete sincerity. I thanked him and went back upstairs. The emails are still in the account. I've read them enough times that certain passages have the quality of something memorized, something that surfaces on its own in quiet moments. The other Joel's voice is still mine, and I don't think it'll stop being mine. You can't unread a thing. I've thought about Mara a lot. I don't know if she existed in his world the way he described her, a real child with a real life who lost her father to something that wore him down from the inside, or whether she was something else, some detail the other Joel included, for reasons I'll never fully understand. I hope she was real. That sounds like a strange thing to hope for, given the context. But a real child, with a life going forward somewhere, seems better than the alternative. I've thought about his draft, the paragraph he left, for whoever came after. I've thought about the fact that he knew someone would find the account, that he'd built this whole thing as a record on purpose, that he sat down in the middle of whatever was happening to him and thought clearly enough about the future to leave a light on in it. That required a kind of presence of mind I'm not sure I would have managed. I've been meaning to delete the account. I haven't yet. 3 weeks after Callum's apartment went empty, a new email arrived. I almost missed it. It came in late on a Sunday night, and I didn't check the account until Monday morning. The sender address was a long string of characters that didn't resolve into any name I recognized. The email was 4 sentences. The voice was mine, or close to mine. Close enough that the difference was small and specific, the way a person's handwriting changes slightly when they're writing fast or writing scared. It said that it had found the account. It said that something had been in its life for about the 8 months, and it was only now starting to see the shape of it. It said it had found our emails and read all of them and understood what they meant. The last sentence said, I don't know if you can see this, but if you can, tell me what to look for. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I hit reply and started typing.